Hey everybody, Roland Frasier here, and I am excited to have you back for session 3. This is the final session in our mini class on Zdot, which is $0 traffic, and how you can acquire Zdot assets, right? So in this one, session 3, we're going to be talking about analysis, how you run your analysis, and also what's the deal stack? How do you put together a deal to acquire one of these Zdot assets? And there's a few tools that we use to do this. They are combined into an Excel spreadsheet, which you can download here, and it is called the Zdot tax sheets. That is the traffic asset cluster, meaning that we're clustered these together in 7 different categories that I explained to you in the last session. And now we're going to actually do some analysis on them and see how do we actually buy these things for $0 out of pocket. And if you remember, taking you back to the traffic triad, this is where we're talking about how are we getting an acceptable target ROAS, return on ad spend, and an acceptable target CAC, customer acquisition cost. Because if we can't do that, even if we have all of the available traffic we need, that's in the top circle, and we have a consistent budget, but we can't do it in a target ROAS and CAC, then we can't profit. And if we can't profit, it's pretty hard to stay in business, okay? So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about ROI analysis first. So ROI analysis is done using the tab on the Excel spreadsheet that is Zdot Asset Acquisition Worksheet, okay? The Zdot Asset Acquisition Analysis Worksheet. Now what you'll see here is that we've broken out the Zdot assets into all the different categories so that you can put what are the details for each of the assets that you're thinking about acquiring, and then you can run some analysis. So here are some sample numbers, some sample data for you on these different assets. You can see each of the categories is separated by color. So social is a green color, groups are a reddish color, SEO is a tannish color. And here we start in this column with how much traffic. How much traffic is the asset getting? How much traffic is the asset getting every single month? And then what's the conversion rate? What's the conversion rate of that traffic, either for the company that owns it currently, or if you have the opportunity to test, what's the conversion rate for you? Or if you don't know any of that, then you can say, this is what I estimate the conversion rate to be, because that's what it's been across these types of assets when I have rented traffic from them before. It's fair to think then that if you buy a similar asset that you've been renting, or you buy the exact asset you've been renting, once you own it, conversion rate's going to be about the same. Next, we want to know what is the average order value? What is the average order value for your product on that asset? If you know, on here, if it's a social Facebook page, what is the average order value when you are able to sell someone and have a conversion from the Facebook page? If you don't know that, then just use your overall AOV, your overall average order value. Then you want to know what's the average LCV? What's the average lifetime customer value? What is the average customer worth to you over the lifetime of that customer? And we just use 1 year here. If you've got customers that stay for years, it might be significantly higher. Here we're just using $600, which is a 1-year average lifetime customer value for this particular product. We then want to know how many actual buyers are going to come from that. Now, the sheet will calculate all of this information once you put in the basic numbers. So all you have to do is enter in a few numbers and the sheet will calculate the rest, like the monthly buyers. It'll also calculate the revenue per month, the revenue per year. Then you need to say, how much does it cost to own this asset? Maybe you have to employ someone that's dedicated to this asset. In this case, I was talking about the Facebook page. How much does it cost you to have someone manage that Facebook page for you, right? And maybe create content for you. So we have different costs in here for different assets. And then going over here on the Facebook page, that's the 12-month cost. And then we say, what's the net profit? That's going to be calculated by subtracting the cost from the revenue. And then we'll know the net profit. We can calculate the ROAS with simple division. And then we'll know what's our Zdot CAC, our Zdot customer acquisition cost. What would it cost us for each customer when we own the asset? Okay. Now in the Facebook page example, it cost us, our Zdot cost is $8 because we own it now, right? Before, our CAC was $120. So we're going to decrease our customer acquisition cost by $112 in that case. $112. That's huge, right? So that's the benefit of owning these assets as opposed to renting them. And you can see the annual savings there, $44,667 a year. So you'll just run this analysis using the Zdot asset acquisition analysis worksheet here for each of the categories and types and specific assets that you're thinking of acquiring. Okay, so that's the first bit of analysis that we're going to do. The next thing is going to be, how can we acquire these things for $0 out of pocket? That's when it gets really exciting, and that's what we have the deal stack for. Now here is the second part of the sheet that you have that you can download, and this is the Zdot Traffic Asset Acquisition Funding Analyzer, right? So here it'll talk about how much are they asking for the asset that they're going to sell, what are the sales that it has on an annual basis, and then you'll put in what is the profit that this is generating for the current owner of the asset, okay? The program will then calculate a multiple, a target multiple, and a delta for you so that you can determine exactly, is this a good deal or not? We typically, as I mentioned in one of the earlier sessions, like to pay 1 times profit for one of these Zdot assets. So if they're asking 1.67, but we like to pay 1, that's our target, then they're over-indexed by 67%, okay? Now, if you know the CAC and the AOV, you can put that in as well. We then start to say, will this person be willing to finance this asset for us? Seller financing is one of the key things that we use when we're acquiring Zdot assets to not have to come out of pocket. Even if you're paying money for it, if you can pay money over time, then you let the asset purchase itself. The asset pays for its own acquisition. This is really, really critical, okay? Now, another thing that you can do, I mentioned in one of the earlier sessions as well, is you can ask the seller if they would be willing to do an earnout. If the seller wants more than you're willing to pay, then you can say, well, I can't pay that right now based on the current performance, but if the asset performs at the level that you think it's going to in the future, we can agree on a formula that will get you the extra money that you want, and that's called an earnout. Again, that's money you don't have to pay now. Seller financing, you don't have to pay that money now. Earnout, you don't have to pay that money now. So the seller might finance a certain percentage of the deal. That goes into the seller financing box. You can see it's green because it's going to carry over to another calculation we do. Will the seller earn out 10%? In this case, we're assuming they'll do, and for a $5,000 purchase, that'd be $500. What are they going to do with the money? And what does the seller ultimately want? You always want to ask those two questions because then you'll know what you need to make happen for the seller to do the deal, okay? Then, do they have any intellectual property that is defensible, like a copyright, trademark, etc., in the asset? That's just for your information as you do the due diligence. Is there any recurring revenue? If there is there any churn, etc.? Like, are you buying a stream of profits? And that's usually more when you're buying a company. But if you're buying an asset, usually there's not like a lot of profits in it currently. Then how many active leads do they have and how many active customers are coming from it each month? That goes into the other calculation. Financials, if they have any, most of them don't with these assets. And then seller negotiation items, right? So what's the seller's asking price and the multiple? Now, this section is pulled from the data that you enter over here. And it's going to tell us before we enter into an agreement, like a preliminary agreement, which we call an LOI or a letter of intent, we want to know what's the seller's asking price, what's our target fair market value, that was a 1, and which is higher. Then we go with the lower of those two because that's what we're willing to pay. If they're not willing to sell it for that, we might not be willing to buy. Then you might negotiate an additional discount. Then we say, are you acquiring 100% of the asset? Because one of the ways to afford these Zdot assets is, if they're expensive, is just don't buy 100%. Buy 60%, right? You'll still be saving money. Then you'll calculate your net purchase price. Then we say, how are we going to value this if we have third parties come into the deal? Because third-party funding is frequently one of the things that we use as we acquire these assets for no money out of pocket. So what's the valuation? Typically, the valuation is going to be the greater of the seller's ask for fair market value, and then we'll negotiate that with the seller, with the investors if we need to. There's no alternative valuation here, so we would enter that valuation if there was one, but there's not, so it just brings the final investor and integrator, that's people who are going to run the asset, value down to here. Now, we go to third-party sources of financing. So can we get some third party to help us invest here? And integrators are people who are going to actually do the work, and investors are people who are passive, who aren't going to do the work. They're just hoping to have an increase in value as you do things with this asset. So it will calculate based on the data that you enter, what percentage are you willing to sell, what would that value be, how much money will come from that, and then we have a pre-closing and post-closing deal stack analysis where it runs through the financing based on all the data that you've entered and says, do we have enough money to acquire this asset with $0 out of pocket or not? And in the pre-closing deal stack, we have the purchase price less any investments from integrators, the people that are going to come and work in the business. Maybe we sell sponsorships. I mentioned that early on in the case studies in session 1. So if we sell sponsorships, that number gets deducted here. If we have cash from investors, that number gets deducted. If we have seller financing or a seller earnout, that gets deducted. And then that tells us how much funding we need. Well, here, where we're buying this asset for $3,000, and we've got all this extra funding, so we're actually $5,700 overfunded, meaning if we did all the things that are listed here, we could put $5,700 in our pocket and own 100% of this asset. Now, then we go down and say, are we going to assume any debt? Well, over here, we see that there is existing debt of $1,000 on this asset, and we are going to assume that. Not personally, because we'll buy this through a company, but we will take that off of the purchase price. Now we're overfunded by $6,700, so we could actually put, it's in parentheses, means we can put it in our pocket. We can own this asset with 100% and put the money in our pocket because I'm not taking any money from investors here, right? If I needed more money, I could take money from investors, but that's why this sheet does all that calculus for you. Now, that's things that we do before we own the asset. There's also stuff we can do after we have title to the asset. We can go to a private lender or a government entity in the United States. It might be the SBA, the Small Business Administration, and get a loan at a ridiculously favorable rate. Or we could go to a private or commercial lender like a bank. And here we didn't need any of that, so that's 0, so we're still $6,700 to the good. We say, could we do revenue-based financing? Could we do financing in the example in session 1 that I showed you for one of the Facebook groups? You saw we used revenue-based financing by telling the seller that we would give them the first $70,000 that came in. So if we were doing a deal like that, that would go in this section. Again, we're overfunded here, so we don't have to. It's just showing you all the different ways that you can acquire these Zdot assets for $0 out of pocket. Then you might offer the seller consulting. That's another option that you have as well. In this case, again, we didn't need to, so there's none. And you might have an earn-in as well, where you say, hey, I don't have the money for everything that I want to do here, but I'm going to run this asset, or I'm going to manage it, or I'm going to monetize it. And for that, I want a percentage. That would be an earn-in. Again, we didn't need it, so we come all the way down to the bottom line, and you see that we've got $6,700 that we not only have, we get to put in our pocket. We not only get to acquire the asset for no money out of pocket, we also get to put $6,700 in our pocket. And I know I ran through this fast for you, but it's really, you can take the time and watch this again. You can take the sample sheet that you're able to download and run through this as well. And we go through the complete system in our full training if that's something that might be a fit for you. Now, last but not least, we have the Zdot Asset Funding Planner, right? And this is a series of calculations and drop downs to look at a particular asset. So you might pick one of the 7 categories here. In this case, it's social. And you would click on the social traffic assets. It would drop down all of the different assets. Maybe we pick Facebook page. The cost to acquire, you enter here. Let's say it was $12,500. And then how are you going to fund it? And all of the different funding options are here in drop-down menus that you can pull down. And then you just allocate the amount that you'll be able to get from each one, and it counts down and continually calculates and recalculates your cash needed as you go through this process. So these different worksheets on this one Excel file will give you everything that you need to be able to calculate, can you afford, how much is the benefit of, and how will you acquire for $0 out of pocket each of the different Zdot assets. So your action items from this 3-session mini class are, number 1, execute your traffic gap audit. Find those honey holes of traffic that you're not using, and then identify the things that are contributing the most and think about, those are probably the most expensive assets, those are probably the most expensive sources of traffic that you've got because they're what you're using right now. What if you just went out and bought them? What if you just went out and bought those, right? The second thing is target your Zdot acquisition assets, okay? That's the second step. The third step, prioritize that based on ROAS, return on ad spend, and CAC analysis. You can do that using the traffic analysis worksheet. And then craft your deal stack to be able to fund these assets for $0 out of pocket. Now, we have 3 options at this point. We're at the end of the mini class, okay? You've learned a lot of great stuff. Now you know how to take control of your traffic. You know that it's better to own than to rent. You know that you can acquire all these different traffic assets across these 7 categories. You know that you can do it for $0 out of pocket, and you've got some tools to get you started with doing that. So you can do nothing right now, which would be a horrible waste of your time. You've taken the time to invest in yourself and watch this, so you've got to take action now, right? Now, you could also do this yourself, right? You can acquire these yourself. I've given you all of the information and all of the tools that you need to do it. Granted, it's high level, but you do have the specific assets in the tools that I've given you to be able to do this for yourself, or you could do it with us. You could let us help you. And if you'd like to do that, then we would love to do that. And not only do we teach you how to acquire $0 traffic assets, that's just one category of assets that we teach you how to acquire. We have a complete program that tells you how to acquire whole businesses and also to do it for $0 out of pocket. And ultimately, there's 216 different strategies for doing that. If you'd like for us to help you with that, then you can click the button below and find out a little bit more information on that as well. Thank you for spending your time with us and investing this time to learn and improve yourself and your business. I'm Roland Frasier, and this was Zdot Traffic Assets. Thank you.